It is
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
At some point, I feel like we would potentially not have any more ways of singing that. But then I realize that's not true. It's always another worse way to say Tuesday. One of my best friends in the whole world has finally agreed to join us on this podcast. Ian Cromwell.
How much convincing did that take?
Very little. I'll be totally honest. But I like to make it seem like it's harder than it was. Because then he'll actively just be like, no, it was you asked me to do a thing. I said, yes. What are you talking about? Ian Cromwell is Dr. Ian Cromwell, I should say, is a man with many hands in baskets. 2 hands in many baskets. How many hands did we establish?
There was
hands in baskets.
There were so many hands in baskets.
There were lots of hands in baskets involved in this. We talk about transferability. We talk about in terms of your skill set, in terms of what you're doing. I mean, Ian works in very, very strongly in music, very, very strongly in health economics. And I love that we had a conversation about the transferability of those 2 seemingly very different careers. But it is perfect for anyone who's having, we call it the edge of the desk job. Where you're doing something, you want to do something that you're really passionate about and you're not really as fulfilled as you were maybe in your current job, or you just want to do something extra. I think this is an episode that really nourishes my belief for sure that you can do multiple things if you streamline what you're doing, if you find the others, as Ian says so well, find people who are like-minded. We call them our fire friends all the time, and I think these are fire collaborators. And then to kind of subscribe to a collective mindset that's not necessarily outcome-based. And Ian has the most articulate way of presenting ideas and equally having so much fun. I have such a long series of laughs whenever we get together and work on things, and whether it's for personal things or for professional things, it's always a joy. So you liked it too, Raquel.
I'm just gonna let Christina take this one. It was awesome. We had so much fun. Enjoy the episode.
I feel like you don't say things because I don't give enough breath to be like, it's now you. Like there's no cue. If you know this by now, if you don't just interrupt, I will keep going. I will just keep going and going and going and going and going.
Christy just sees me laughing. But you covered everything. I don't have to say anything else.
I didn't talk about stone soup. I gave you many other things to talk about.
But they have to actually listen to the whole episode.
They don't have... But yeah, this is piquing interest. I don't know. What do you think? Does everyone else want Raquel to do the introductions? Because I would quite like for you to do it. If I'm doing it because there's silence. This is on an audio platform as well as other platforms. You can't let there just be silence. There's not silence. This is not time for awkward pauses. Anyway, this is not about us. This is about the community.
Now my cheeks hurt from laughing. Just enjoy the episode, okay?
Just enjoy the episode. Okay, that's going to be the future introductions of everything. Raquel's going to be like, I'm going to introduce this. Just enjoy it. God, I'm not going to tell you what's happening. Okay, good job. Well done. Bye-bye. Here's Ian Cromwell.
Oh my god. Okay, wait, we're starting. 3, 2, 1. The clap is in. Christina, let's go.
Okay, can I just be really clear? Normally, I'm the one that does the clap for our team that says, hello, we're starting now.
She's upset
but when
now
Raquel does it, she goes, clap, we're going to start now, everyone. So are you ready to start? That's not the point of the clap.
That was supposed to be in the...
Welcome to the Christina and Raquel show. Ian just happens to be here.
Unhelpful.
Ian Cromwell.
Now we can start. because I have clapped.
And you're who matters to me.
This is just going to be a reset episode. Every time someone doesn't like what was said, you clap straight.
And starting now.
Raquel laughed too loudly, and now. So we start with the slowest applause in the world. Ian, I have to say, Ian Cromwell, one of my favorite human beings, one of my bestest friends. And I'm saying that because I know bestest isn't a word, and that probably irked him, and that brings me joy. Ian has been in my life for not long enough. And every time we work together, converse, make food, hang out, go for seawall walks. I walk into him busking because, you know, he's giant. So it's really, if you're not looking or paying attention, you walk in and just slam and then you roll backwards. And then you're like, it's Ian Cromwell. Every single interaction that we've had has been nothing short of a joy and hilarity and learning and love and light. So Ian, it's been a really long time for me wanting to have you on. And Raquel, you got to meet Ian this summer, and I'm just so happy we get to chat to you today.
I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me. Very warm. It's probably the single warmest introduction I've ever been given to anything ever. So
what? I do that to you every time I see you. That's not true.
Yeah, actually, that's.
It's kind of true.
She literally has it written down, and every time she introduces you, she pulls out her Ian Cromwell paper and
I scroll.
I start mouthing the words along with her. Sometimes I run into him and bump into him. Like, let's yada yada. Let's get through this. We've only got an hour.
Oh my god. Okay, you do so many things. When I met you this summer, I was like, okay, so you do what for your career, and you do what with Locals Lounge, and you do, okay, so you have your hands in so many baskets. Can you explain, first of all, health economics? What is a health economics manager? And who gets their doctorate in it? And what does one do in this world of health economics?
Sure.
Let's start with science.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my field, as you mentioned, is health economics, and people think of economics as a thing about money, about what the economy is doing money-wise. But really, economics is a science about decision making. It's trying to understand and quantify how we choose between alternatives so that we can maximize our chances of a certain outcome. That's what we're really trying to do in economics. Health economics is about doing that in the context of the healthcare system. So we have a finite amount of money that we can spend on healthcare. We have a much bigger demand for healthcare than we have a budget to cover it. And so we have to make decisions as a society about what kinds of things we want our healthcare system to do and how we're going to allocate these finite resources to get the most health, however we want to define that. Because health is not one thing. Health is not just whether or not you currently have a disease. When we think about things like chronic illness, long-term disability, there's lots and lots and lots of different things that can fall under the umbrella of health. And so we try our best as health economists to measure and understand how we make trade-offs. Because a dollar that we have that we spend over here is a dollar that we don't have over here. So a dollar that we might spend on a new MRI is a dollar that we don't have to spend on a new hospice care facility. A dollar that we spend on a really expensive new gene therapy is a dollar that we don't have to spend on housing or addictions counseling. So we have to think broadly about how we allocate funding. So that's what health economics is. What I do specifically is I work for a federally and provincially funded nonprofit agency called CADIF. And CADIF, basically my job is to check Big Pharma's homework. Big Pharma wants us to buy all of the drugs that they produce. Only some of them are going to give us good value for the money that we're spending on it. And so the question becomes, how do we make those decisions? And so I work with small teams of analysts and people who have epidemiology backgrounds, clinicians, policymakers, to try to get a sense of the state of the evidence for a given drug or technology that we might want to add to the healthcare system. So that's what I do.
Can I ask a question on that? Specifically, whether or not the definition of health has changed over the years, and who determines that? Because we're in Canada right now, or Turtle Island, and we are in a situation where we're starting to have more conversations around what health is. But I don't know where it was, and whether you know where it kind of came from, what's now being incorporated into health that wasn't before, perhaps?
It's a little bit beyond my area of expertise, so I can give my opinion. But this is like these kinds of questions. First of all, there's no one who decides what health is. There are people who decide what the healthcare system funds.
Yeah.
There are laws that govern what the healthcare system has to do and how it has to behave. But in terms of an overarching definition of health, the World Health Organization has its definition that's kind of sets the standard for the world, unsurprisingly. And that's
otherwise they'd have the worst name,
right?
World Health Organization. We work with Florida.
Spaghetti. Yeah. But yeah, so the WHO definition considers health to be this very multifaceted, multidimensional thing, this concept that includes social well-being, emotional well-being, of course, physical well-being. But as a couple of things are happening. First is we're moving from a model of health and healthcare that was classically focused on hospitals, because hospitals are where you go when you're sick and then they make you better, and that's healthcare. That's kind of the narrow definition that we sort of started when we built the healthcare system in Canada. But as our population has changed, as we've gotten better about preventing infectious disease, as we've gotten better about preventing accidents and other forms of things that would be best treated by hospital care, our population needs have changed towards a more chronic disease model where people have ongoing issues that require multidimensional, multidisciplinary forms of care. And so going to a doctor at a hospital is the solution to fewer and fewer health problems that we have as a society. We're also starting to see, as particularly as we begin to adopt more indigenous ways of knowing and integrating indigenous concepts of health and well-being into our healthcare system, recognizing the importance that community and interconnectedness have for our health, and recognizing that an individual person's health is not only up to them and whether or not they are doing well, but whether the society around them is doing well. So health is beginning to encompass things like housing, it's beginning to encompass things like education, and it's beginning to encompass things like the social environment and whether or not we can actually be connected to each other. We are not a species where we evolved to be alone. We evolved to be in groups, and that has an impact on our health as well.
Yeah, I love that.
Oh my God. I want to go mostly into, like, we talked about mostly diving into the music side, so I need to invite you back on another time to really pick your brain on all things health.
That's
because
what happens when you down that basket
hands. Ian Basket Hands Cromwell.
There it is.
Oh, just a basket full of joy. Or many baskets full of just... I'll come up with some puns later.
We can go back to the Polly Pocket.
We had a Polly Pocket analogy earlier.
Okay.
Because Love Pocket sounded weird.
It had to be a pretty big pocket.
It would, yes, it would. It would. Okay, but I want to shift to Musicland, but I do want to say thank you for that. And you got your doctorate... is it a doctorate in health economics, or is it a longer title? Because you do modeling. You've created these very unique models as well within that sphere. I just want to know a little bit about that, because I love that. I think that it does transfer into the way that you think about music, the way we work together in the music industry as well. So
if I have a doctorate in anything, you kind of just have a doctorate. It's in population and public health. That's the name of the department at UBC that I graduated from. The modeling piece is a small part of health economics that I'm personally interested in. A lot of times it's just not feasible, either because it's expensive or because it's unethical, to run clinical trials on everything to get that kind of information. It's very laborious. And so health economists will often create computer simulation models that try to replicate processes in health and in healthcare, and then look at how known relationships between statistical outcomes and things like that will interact in the concept of this model. So you try to come up with a reasonable representation of how the world works in a computer, and then you simulate it a bunch of times and kind of try to get like we're likely to see this outcome at this cost. So I do some of that work as well. My thesis was around building a model that would be open source and that would allow other people to come in and make changes and build things, so that instead of having to build a new model every time, you can start to build models that interact with the rest of the world. Particularly useful for people who are trying to make healthcare decisions in low and middle income countries.
So it's just lowering the barriers. You're creating accessibility and not reinventing the wheel.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
which
right.
I love. And
inviting collaboration, which is a big core value for me, is finding ways to build things with other people.
Which is the perfect segue into the other basket fingers. Thank you. Thank you for, as usual, making my life more awesome. Ian Cromwell. I don't know why I put a fake phone up next to, cheers with my fake phone hand. Anyway.
I don't know why you do half the things you do, Christine.
No, you're right. It's true. Who does? So speaking of, shifting into music land, which is how you and I met, specifically at an outdoor event that Ian quite happily will say to people had no impact. I like to think I have a decent first impression. Like, I tell the story of Raquel and I first meeting. I tell the story of pretty much everyone else. And then I tell the story of Ian. He's like, that's not how I remember it. Like, you were very, like, I just didn't remember you. You weren't important. And I was like,
question in there? Or?
No, there's not. I'm just talking.
This is me time.
It's my time now. But there is a reason that I am bringing this up, because Ian and I met at another local grassroots collective. And then Ian, a few weeks, months, maybe later, what is time, arrived at a show that I was putting on for a local collective that I had started. And I think I remember, again, for some reason, I seem to remember whenever you walk into a room. But Ian came in, took his helmet off, put it on the side, and then just stood there and watched. And I was like running. I just literally was like very unsafely running through this restaurant, being like, do you need something? Is everyone happy? Where are my musicians? What is going on? I had no concept of how to run an event. Ran over to Ian and I was like, oh my gosh, you're here. That's so great. And he was like, and I was like, so great to see you. I gotta be back. I've got to go. He was like, we had a conversation after this, and that kind of very frenetic energy was, I think, the first time that Ian saw the reality of what happens in my mind when I am building community.
So I'm going to tell the other side of this story. Which
oh, okay.
So this is the other side of the story. First of all, the thing that we met at is exactly as you described. We were introduced by a mutual friend, and it was just like, "Hi, I'm Christina," and I went, "Hi," and that was the extent of the interaction. And apparently it was world-shatteringly significant for Christina. I apologize that it wasn't a bigger deal for me. However,
maybe she's never seen anyone so tall.
I'm not that. I mean, I'm tall, but anyway. Maybe it was the giantness that stuck out. But what happened that second time? Vancouver is a city where a lot of people have the initiation burst. They have the idea, they have a concept for something, and it's not a city, I would say, that has a lot of follow through on a lot of those ideas. People have good intentions, but it's that next step of actually making the attempt and trying to build something and sticking with it and putting the energy in. And whenever I meet people who are willing to take that check, because it's exhausting. It's really exhausting work, and it usually doesn't work out for you in the immediate instance. And so whenever I meet someone who actually cares deeply enough to put themselves into something and to put themselves into something that builds community and connection and really just like tries to make a difference, that speaks volumes to me. And what I saw when I walked into that room was someone who deeply, deeply cared about what she was doing and really wanted to make sure that people were getting the most out of it and seeing the same vision that she had. And that to me was the moment we became friends, with your input or not. That little tiny interaction of like, hey, good to see you. I haven't been gone, is how our friendship has been every time we see each other in public. That's kind of how it goes. I get a good solid 30 to 45 seconds of Christina time, and then she's off doing something else. And I'm exactly the same way when you come to one of my events. So this is just how it is. So I recognize that same impulse, and I place a very high value on it. And my opinion of you was started high and has only gotten higher since then.
Well, you're amazing, and I think and thank you. And I think one of my favorite moments of this summer was when Ian and I put on a show together, and he was on one end of the stage, I was on the other end talking to the production team somewhere. And we literally were both like, when you stride in the middle of it, when you're like, I have so much purpose. And he just looked at me, just completely, both of us were just deadpan faced, puts his hand up, high fives. And we just like literally high five and keep walking because we had to be at other places putting on this event. But and that I think is the nature of our relationship and of really amazing collectives that happen and have popped up around Vancouver. But tell me a little bit further back, when did your passion for actual performance of music start? And I have been very lucky to listen in to your parents' wonderful performances recently. But tell me how that started, and then how you moved into the organizing, the event side of things, the collective that is Locals Lounge.
I've been playing music since I was a child. I started on violin lessons when I was 6. I sang in the choir, picked the guitar when I was in high school. So music has always been a part of my life, and an important part of my life. Like something that I would say I worked equally hard to become a musician as I did to become a scientist. And it's always been just a core part of my identity. So when I moved back to Vancouver in 2009, I didn't really I didn't know a ton of people, and but I did play music, and I was interested in sort of doing that some more. And so I started jamming with a couple of local musicians, and then that ended up turning into we formed a band, and then that band got a gig, and then I started doing stuff on my own, just for fun, just because it was the interesting thing to do with music. But things really changed for me when I started playing with a looper pedal, and began experimenting with using the looper to play guitar and then put violin stuff over top of that. And so I began writing and arranging and doing stuff that was built around the looper, and that became, it's a cool gimmick, and it's a fun thing to watch. It's a fun show to be a part of. And so I started getting requests to play my own solo gigs here and there. That became a bigger part of my life as the years went on. And I got the opportunity to perform at a place called the Belmont Bar, which is now the Hotel Belmont down on Granville and Nelson. And I'd played there a few times. In fact, one of the first times I played there was with a show that Christina curated, a really, really cool thing where they paired up a cocktail maker with musicians. And so it was the musician who would suit the mood of the cocktail. It was very cool. It was synesthesia kind of thing. Very neat. Mm-hmm. And after that performance, the folks at Belmont approached me and asked if I could help book more local music there, because I knew a bunch of local musicians just because I'd been on the scene for a while. And there's a real challenge that comes with being a local artist, especially in a place like Vancouver, which is hard to tour in and out of. Where getting any kind of notoriety, building up any fan base is really, really very difficult, especially difficult in this city, partially just because of its geography. And what I realize is that when I go to a show, I see the same mix of people there. And, half of them are other musicians who are there because that's what you do as a musician. You go and support your friends. And then the other half are people who know someone who's on this, who know one of the artists who's performing. And I figure that if we can build a place for to, you know, double down on that personal connection to the art that's happening in the performance, that we can create a stronger music community that's built around personal interaction, and that people can get the depth and the context behind the music, which just makes the music more enjoyable, but also creates a sustainable economy for music locally. And so the concept that I pitched to the Belmont was actually a combination of interview and performance. So I would sit down with a different artist each month, and we just learn a bit about their lives and what motivates them, what their experiences have been like. The audience gets to ask questions, and then there's this performance that you now have the human context behind it. And so that we started doing that in the fall of 2016, and I built up a team of people to help me, put this show on. We did that at the Belmont for 2 years. Then we moved to the Railway Club. That got the kibosh got put on that by the pandemic, and so that was a frustrating and difficult challenge that we ended up pivoting online. I began doing a little bit more like music curation stuff, where people would approach me and say, "Hey, I'm looking for a local musician to do this thing," and so I would make some introductions and make some connections. Um, and now Locals Lounge is really more of a tour guide, a concierge service, a way of bringing people into the music community as members, whether they're a player or whether they're just someone who loves local music.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Everyone is welcome. This is what's going on. This is how you can get involved. We've recently got some funding to do a new project that I'm really excited about. That it's where I will be, Locals Lounges will be supporting a group of different projects. We're all going to be able to learn lessons from each other, and sort of build connections between the different projects to give people more opportunities to get involved.
And I think that's a beautiful way of summing up how Locals Lounge started, and now, moving into the initiative that's going to be coming up in the next months and years. One thing that you do really well here, and I think I just want to go back to paint the picture to our international audience about Vancouver. It can be a very cliquey city in very different ways, and it not all the time, but there are what Ian and I have discussed before as silos. And so we will often have conversations about how do we, one, develop audiences, two, engage people at a deeper level, and three, and this was the big one for Ian, is that how do we actually collect meaningful data, and use that and use the rationale and the way that amazing brain of yours works to kind of model out some systems of success. And I love that you said sustainable success, Ian, because that's one of the things that's been both rewarding and very frustrating for both of us in this industry, is that when a lot of people start something and they haven't looked at what else is out there. They don't know. They just know that they want to start something, which is great. But the city is not massive. We are not a hugely populous city. So what can happen is those silos can continue to perpetuate and continue to fracture. And as an industry, we have an incredible funding system. We have Amplify BC, which is like a $22.5 million 3-year music fund dedicated to the music industry. Now, just like the health economics, $1 going into one place is going to be $1 that can't go into another. So I just wanted you to just break it down on how you started looking at the data and what really brought you to running Locals Lounge the way that you currently do.
So I'll bracket this just by saying that the data collection aspect of Locals Lounge is a relatively recent development. This is something that emerged from the pandemic. We had been running this thing for about 4 years, and I hadn't collected any data at all. And when we tried to pivot online, I realized we don't know who our audience is. We don't know what they want. We're trying this format, that format, the other format. We're working ourselves to the bone, and we have no idea if what we're doing is working.
Mm.
And that's modus operandi for every organizer in the city. Everyone who I talk to, every grassroots organizer, every community collective, they're just going off of vibes. That's just how it works. But if you talk to music organizers in Vancouver, they will tell you that they'll give you one of two reasons why people didn't show up to their event on a given day. One, it was raining. And no one wants to leave the house when it's crappy out. So we stay at home. That's one. The other, it's too nice out. People want to be at the beach.
So
the message that I take home from these two answers is that no one knows. Everyone has an explanation, but those explanations aren't rooted in any. The other thing that COVID really showed me is that the audience for live music is much broader than the audience that gets marketed to. People with young children, people, older adults, people who don't speak English as a first language, people with physical disabilities and accessibility issues, people who live outside the city and don't necessarily want to commute in at 10 o'clock at night to stand in the back of the railway club to watch a band play. Like, these are people who would love to be part of a show, would love to but no one's trying to build something for them. And so recognizing that the audience that we want is out there, but what we need to do is a better job of learning what it is that they want. I think that's key. And getting back to this idea of how the economics fits into this. Most economic principles are built around the idea of scarcity. There is a finite amount of resources, and so we have to make sure that and this is just kind of classical economic thinking, is that in
opportunity
order for me to
cost.
I have to make sure that I accumulate as much as I can get individually, and that I am competing with other people. There's a finite number of fans with a finite amount of money, and we have to make sure that we are building it. So there's no real incentive to connect and work with other groups. But I think that's completely backwards, because I think what we're dealing with is a situation where there's a high amount of demand, and that demand is not being met adequately. And that we can actually manufacture more demand by bringing more options to people and having them buy into the idea that there is something valuable here for them to show up for. But if they only hear about this random thing over here and this random thing over there, then they're going to treat each one of those as an opportunity that is divorced from a larger context. And if we can build a more connected, more linked, more collaborative community, and then welcome people not into our event that is happening on this day at this time, but rather into a community where opportunities for arts and culture are abundant, that you have lots and lots of places where you can make those connections, that people will want to do that more, and more people will want to do it. Helping each other, putting gas in each other's tanks, blowing wind into each other's sails is the way of the future. And that is how we can get the most out of the funding that we have. It's how we can get the most out of every hour that we have to work to put into these projects, is by sharing and by collaborating. And so that's the other piece of this new Locals Lounge project. We're going to collect the data, and that data is going to be shared among the organizers and with the community more broadly. As we learn lessons, everyone gets to benefit from that.
I think going back to that, I love seeing the parallels between what you do in your day job and then what you're doing in your other day job. Because let's be honest, we work long hours. We have 2 full-time jobs. But one of the other parallels is your want to create an open source system, because I think in order, and I will add one more piece to that, I am a very big advocate of audience development in younger years, when people are being exposed to music, language, culture of different varieties. And one of the events that Ian and I put on was sponsored by the Puni Group, and was a Granville Promenade pilot that a few city councillors and other people had been really championing, and the Downtown Vancouver Business Improvement Association had been really pushing forward with. And it just made it accessible in a way that music had not been accessible in our city before. And I think there have been different iterations, but one of the panels I was on recently, I talked about how, and Councillor Sarah Kirby-Young talked about how we need to create a pilot culture and to create these opportunities for people to continue to, in a safe way, be exposed to a little bit of music, something different. We had Tisa singing in Farsi, and we have people who are from all these different walks of life, performing in different ways. So creating that open source system means that a lot of the other grassroots collectives and other people are not having to reinvent the wheel, just in the same way as when you did, when you were talking about creating these models for other scientists and other organizations to be able to use and to collaborate and to provide input into. The thing that I think can be very difficult with the arts piece is that it can be difficult to get people to invest in something that they haven't fully created themselves. And I think that's something that Locals Lounge does very well in terms of engaging in a way that allows people to honor who they are rather than be absorbed into a bigger thing. And I just wanted to
being artists?
Sorry, the other organizations that
other organizations.
So when Locals Lounge talks about collaborating with all these other different organizations, that's retaining their identity of those other organizations and creating this overarching cause. And that was a very intentional thing that you did, Ian. And I just wanted to know, where you're coming from in terms of that, not reinventing the wheel, in terms of like allowing this city and this province to become a greater and greater music hub. I don't know if there was a question in there, but your thoughts.
One of my favorite childhood stories is an old folktale from, I believe it originates in Eastern Europe, but I could be wrong about that. But it's the story of stone soup. And this guy shows up in the middle of a town, small town, and he goes to the town square and he says, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to make soup out of this rock. And he pulls a rock out of his pocket. And everyone laughs and says, you can't make soup out of a rock. So he builds himself a fire and he gets a pot and he fills a pot with water and he drops the rock in the water and then he sits and waits. And someone gets curious and they come over and they say, what's happening with your rock soup there, buddy? He says, it's actually turning out okay. Just what it needs is like an onion. And then it's pretty much good to go. So the guy says, I got an onion at home. So he goes home and he chops up the onion, throws it in the pot, and he sits down and he waits for the soup to finish. And then someone comes over. Now there's two people around the pot. Third person comes over and says, what are you guys doing? And says, we're making stone soup. But, it needs a little bit of like broth. If you're having some like a chicken broth base, this thing would be good to go. So yeah, I got some chicken at home. So, and so one by one, everyone in the town comes and they contribute a single ingredient, what they can offer. And at the end, they have this amazing soup that everyone gets to partake in. And they all say, I can't believe he made all that soup out of a rock. Like, that's amazing. I've never heard anything like it. And I think, to me, that is a really powerful illustration of how these kinds of things can work, where if everyone brings something to the table, everyone brings one piece, the piece that they can uniquely contribute, then we all benefit. We all benefit through that force of collaboration. We all benefit from having those distinct contributions. If everyone brought the same thing, it'd be a terrible soup. But what we have instead is a recognition that diversity strengthens us. It brings different ideas. It brings different perspectives to the table. It allows us to build collaborations that may not have existed before. But I think a key part of that is being able to recognize that you have made a contribution to what's going on, that you have not been subsumed in someone else's idea, but rather that you have contributed, that you are a partner. And so that true collaboration as peers, as equals, is a really key part of what I believe the future of political organizing, including what I'm trying to do with Locals Lounge, could be.
I love that. And it makes me think of advertising worlds as well. I mean, if you think back to orange juice, like, wasn't it? I have to stretch back into my memory box, but I believe what happened was in California, they had grown too many oranges. And so basically the cost was driving down because they just had too much supply. And there's an association, and so they came together and they're like, what are we going to do? All the farmers came together and they were like, all right, well, this is orange juice. Then this is what we're going to do. We're going to market it this way, blah blah blah. And now orange juice is at almost every breakfast you see. So you're coming together, and you're not believing in the zero sum game. You're like, okay, let's all grow together.
Yeah.
And then everyone has their unique flavor. I love that. So how do you balance it again? Like the two massive careers?
Yeah, how?
I love the wide eyes. For anyone who can't see, there was just wide eyes.
But this is a question that I get a lot, and the answer to that question has changed over the years. Because for a long time the answer was at the expense of my mental health and happiness.
Yeah.
That is how I managed to do all of these things, is by not prioritizing being a happy, fulfilled person who has friends who pick up the phone when he calls. That was the answer to that. And that's not healthy. It's not sustainable. It's not a good way of being. We have a hustle culture that exists. And, I'm saying this as someone in his late 30s who has gone through the hustle that, it took a lot of hustle to get to where I am. So I certainly don't want to say that everyone should just kind of hang out in a hammock and wait for success to arrive, because that's not how it works. But I think the key, there are two keys on this. And the first is finding the others. Is finding other people who see the same vision that you see and are going to be pulling in the same direction that you're pulling, so that you don't have to, as Christina says, reinvent the wheel, that you don't have to do everything yourself as an individual effort, because that you get burned out so fast and exhausted so fast, and every failure will hurt and every success will be muted by the fact that you have so much more to do. So that's thing number one. And I guess thing number two is within yourself. You have to find the overlap. You have to find how the thing that you're doing over here fits together with the thing that you're doing over here, and to find those synergies and those passions, and to figure out what it is that's actually driving you and inspiring you to do more, so that what you're doing is not two completely different jobs. Although it may seem like I have this career that exists over here in this left brain kind of place, and then a career that exists on the other side, and ne'er the twain shall meet. But that's not how I live my life. They reinforce each other. And I think that finding out how to fit things in your life together in a way that everything reinforces everything else is a lifelong journey, but is the key to being successful and being fulfilled by what you're doing.
Says it so succinctly.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Just it is so succinct. And I think this is where, Ian and I nerd out a lot over transferability, about career pathways in media and entertainment. And I think we're now shifting, thankfully, into a culture that has more than monetary value attached to their perception of success. And I don't know about you two, but my goodness, the pandemic really got me questioning so many more things. And already Ian and I would have these conversations. I'd come over and be like, I am melting. I mean, he knew that Indie Van City, the collective that I started, that was a great example of when he was saying it burns you out when you're trying to do it by yourself. And when Ian started Locals Lounge, he has very publicly said, my friend Christina did all the things that I am now not going to do. Thank you for allowing me to learn those lessons. And that goes back to the finding the others. When I had this conversation with someone again the other day where I said, we were talking about Ian, and I had said, this is the person that I can go to. And Raquel, you're the same with me now since we've started Bombshells. there are people that you can go to that understand and have been in that place or are going through it again, and can be there in a way that is actually still weirdly nourishing when you're melting. And you're like, oh, I'm melting, but I'm not alone. I'm not alone doing this. I know, and they're those people that will remind you what you believe in, and they remind you why. And Ian is very, very good, as you can all tell, a much, much more articulate person than Ramble Hands over here. Basket Hands is...
Well, we're all hands today.
We're all...
Great.
Raquel's just all hands. Ramble Hands, Basket Hands, and all hands. But Ian would say, that remember why you're doing this. And if I was like, I don't think that this is worth it anymore. I don't want to. it would just be too much for me. And the response that Ian would give me would very often be the one that I needed to hear, not always the one I wanted to hear. And just a few months ago, we had that conversation again when I had a complete burnout. And 2 weeks before, he was like, I have noticed this. This is what happened when this happened to me. The next stage is complete meltdown. And I was like, that's not going to happen to me. 2 weeks later, I was like, hello. It happened.
I mean, the other half of that story is that I had experienced a massive burnout the year before, and the person who I went to when everything was spinning around me and I couldn't figure out which way was up was Christina, who talked me down off a ledge many, many times. So I think this goes back to something that I mentioned earlier, is that we're not meant to live this life, to go through this life alone. That's just not how our species works. It's not what we're supposed to do. And we do live in a society where we recognize individual success, and that every person is, tasked with building their individual brand. And we talk a lot about, individual successes, and, our social media presence is really about me. It's I. It's not so much we. And that has its positives, but I think what it's done is it's divorced us from the concept of shared success.
Are you still clapping? What are you doing?
And we're starting now. Hi, I'm Ian Cromwell. Welcome to my podcast. I think that if we see ourselves as being needing to stand alone and needing to do everything ourselves, and if our model for success is I cannot be successful unless my life looks like everyone else's highlight reel, then we end up in this constant state of being too afraid to ask for help, too unwilling to admit when we can't do something alone, unsure of how to proceed because we don't have others' examples to work off of, and trapped in our own fear and feelings of failure, constant drumming failure. And that's toxic. It's toxic to the individual, and it's toxic to the community. Any endeavor that you want to put, if you always feel like you're going to fail, you're either going to burn out because you're going to try just too hard through sheer effort, or because you just don't know what you're doing, which is most of us. So I think we do need to be a lot more, and I think that this consciousness is changing, and we are moving towards a recognition, especially during the pandemic, that we need each other, that my well-being is dependent on the well-being of the person next to me. And if I'm not working to ensure that that person is also doing well, then it impacts me negatively.
I think the social media side is a big one too. I think it can really bring out that individualistic, it's the highlight reel, but it's also bringing out this me kind of world, and just being the main actor of your own life. And of course you are, but it starts leaving out everyone else, and it starts leaving out all of those other experiences. I was actually today, I'm in South Africa right now. So I was downtown in Cape Town, and I was just looking around, and there was this crazy Instagram culture, and I'm talking unlike I've ever seen. And I'm in this restaurant, I'm looking over, and there's the ocean, and it's beautiful, and sunny, and I see all these people. There's hordes of people by the water, and I see this seal, and it's like coming in and out of the water and jumping up. Nobody saw it. Nobody. Not a single person saw it. Everybody was taking Instagram photos. There was hordes of people there, and literally, like, there'd be like a group of people taking a picture of like their one friend, and then they would circle, and then like the group of people. So like each person had their own phone angle, and I was like, nobody really, like nobody's seeing this beautiful seal. But it's like they're together but alone, because they're taking these pictures, but they're not interacting with their friends. They're not, they're not present. And I think that's one of the things that when I went to the event on Granville that you guys put on, it was so amazing. And it was the first time in so long, because of COVID, of course, everything was shut down as well, that I had been able to go out to something and everyone was so present. And that's what music does. It just makes you present. You're there, you're listening, like you're feeling, it was awesome. It was so impossible to not be present. Also, it was sunny and lovely, so and it was outside, so the whole Vancouver argument just didn't work. Like, it was sunny but it was outside, so
Well, they shut down the whole street. They shut down the whole street for that, to activate the street, to allow people to gather, and by virtue of doing that, allowed for people who wouldn't otherwise be able to access an over 19 venue, and then by the nature of the businesses in their surrounding areas, they had to be family friendly. There was a giant Scrabble board somewhere that people put mostly dirty words on. I'm not going to lie, but it was hilarious in its own way. Yeah, we'd look around and be like, penis. Okay. Yeah. It's 12 o'clock in the afternoon. But you would, our friend Elliot Slynn came in and did poetry, and we got these beautiful poems that was what did he call it? It was impromptu poetry.
Yeah, it was incredible.
He's incredible.
And, like, when would you otherwise see that? Like, I would never have known about it.
Yeah, it was.
But I think that's the other key to being present, is giving people space to participate. Mm-hmm. Something that they can actually do, not just something that they can see. Mm-hmm. Because that's what Instagram culture is. You get the photo for the gram, and that's the whole. Is you want to get the image of the thing. It's not about whether or not you've done anything meaningful with that thing. It's like the charcoal ice cream, where you it's not meant to be.
What? Why would they call it ice cream?
Terrible. It's ice cream, but what you buy it for is to have a picture of yourself holding the ice cream cone. Or those weird unicorn frap that they make sometimes at Starbucks, and it's all crazy color,
so nasty.
And they taste terrible. But they are specifically to be photographed.
Yeah.
I am having this thing, and it immediately goes in the garbage, because no one actually wants the experience. They want the image. And so I think pushing back against that and giving people an opportunity to be not only present but active. And that's the difference, I think, between the kinds of shows that I try to build with Locals Lounge, and what I would say is more standard show, where you pay your ticket, you go in, you sit down, you shut up, you receive, and that's the end of it. That is your role as the audience. And what I get to do as a musician is use music as a way of being connected to what's going on around me. And I get to do that from the stage, but also as a musician sitting in the audience, I can say, aha, they're doing this thing and they're doing that, and I can sing along or whatever. And I think inviting people and making place and space and excuse for them to actually be involved and to participate is, I think, an underappreciated key of what it takes for people to be fully present. And that's what I loved about the Granville Promenade Day, is that there were lots of ways for people to just be there and to be involved and to be active. And then there was great music as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a wonderful, wonderful day. And it was the first time that Ian and I got to formally work together, and it's the first of many to come. We have another show coming up, or another collaboration coming up in a very short time, and many more. But I want to go back into the team culture, because this was a really big piece. And I think, again, speaking to the transferability, Raquel and I have been through this and are in it right now, where we have this incredible team of people and are learning very honestly learning how to be good collaborators, learning how to bring this team into a mutually beneficial situation where they're gaining value, they're feeling respected and admired for what they do, and they are helping to, in a very participatory way, to be a part of a systemic change that we are envisioning for the world. And it sounds grand, but it is that grand. That is what we are intending to do. With Locals Lounge, I know you and I have had a lot of conversations about teams, because when I had Indie Van City, I had volunteers and they were amazing. And I was just so stretched that I wasn't managing them well. They didn't know what they needed to do. And I tried it until I burned out, and I couldn't delegate. And it was one of those big things that Ian was like, taking that, I'm going to delegate the hell out of this one. And you probably knew it already before, but I think I wanted to talk to you. Well, the way, the team itself for Locals Lounge has gone through iterations. And I just wanted to figure out, for anyone who's starting up, especially whatever you're starting, if you've got like what do we call it, Raquel? Like the edge of your desk business that you're doing on the corner of your desk while you have a full-time job, but you know that this is something you're being called to do. And then you get to that point where you're like, I just don't have time. Can you walk us through what happened in your mind when you were like, I need to grow this team? Like, what did that really look like? Like, really break that down. And then, a couple of the iterations of what you did and what you learned from. And so that if someone else was to have a business at the edge of their desk and be like, oh, I'm ready to do this, but I can't afford to, or I don't know where to start, then maybe some of the lessons that you had can be useful to our lovely listeners and watchers out there.
So you've described a process that I do not follow, and I'll explain what I mean by that. I did not start with a specific vision in mind, with a goal in mind. This has not been a goal-oriented process for me. This has been a process-driven process for me.
Oh.
That what I did is I knew that I had one ingredient. This is going back to the stone soup analogy. Mm-hmm. I had a stage at a venue downtown, and I had kind of the core of an idea. Mm-hmm. And what I did is I looked around for other people, and I still do. This is 90% of what my job is to look around and to say, who else is trying to do stuff off the edge of their desk? Where is the alignment? What is our mutual, a mutually beneficial relationship? What would that look like? And a lot of that is honestly just asking people, what do you want? Like, what's your vision? What does success look like to you? And invite people to just paint a picture of what their ideal future is. And then to say, okay, well, what is one concrete thing that you and I could do right now that would get you closer to where you want to be and get me closer to where I want to be? Let's start there. Let's just do that.
Stop.
Yes, start now. And once you've done that one collaboration, then you get to say, okay, cool. Well, where do we go next? And don't be, at least my advice, if you want to do this as a full-time job and you want to do a business plan and do the whole MBA thing, like, more power to you. I don't know how any of that works. I'm not going to try to give you any advice on that. But if you, like me, your passion project is one of 50,000 things that you're doing at any given moment, then cut yourself off from the seductive trap of having a specific outcome in mind. And instead, focus on your values, what drives you, what makes you passionate, what makes you engaged and interested in what you're doing. Find other people who have that same passion, that same drive, and then just jam. Just find stuff that you like doing together. You'll end up where you end up, but you're guaranteed that you're going to be happy when you get there.
I want to add one piece to that as well, though. And I love all of that. And I think the one of the secret ingredients for Stone Soup Time is to have people who can execute. And just going back to right at the beginning when you were talking about the thing that apparently allowed me to be friends with you was that was that
Surely wasn't your personality.
yeah. But the thing was, you knew that I cared, but you saw that I was doing. So I can tell you what I believe in, but what matters to me. And when I looked back at when Ian started Locals Lounge, and by the way, I built Indie Van City to die. So Ian and I have very complementary personalities in some ways, and in others, they are opposing when you first look at them, but they're so enriching when you combine them, which is another way of saying complementary. But it was the way that I did it was I created the vision. I was like, this is what I want to achieve, and I want it to end at some point. I want there to be this vision for this thing and get it realized. And I was very, very calculative. I was very like, this is what I'm going to do. And then when it is not useful, I'm going to kill it. I knew I was going to kill it. And I was very vocal about this with Ian. And so when Ian started Locals Lounge, I looked at him and saw what he was doing and realized that I didn't need to do what I was doing anymore. I had finally gotten to a point where I was like, we're not doing the same things. We were never doing the same things, but I knew what I was looking to achieve. He was now taking on and doing as a 2.0 from me. And I looked at the quality of the output, and I looked at the people that were getting up and playing, and I looked at how safe and at home I felt within that community. And I was like, I can now take that, kill my baby, and move on and level up and go, okay, now I'm going to do this. And it was around that time that I started to think about joining the board of directors for the local music industry association, because I realized that someone who I worked so well with, who was so value aligned, who could execute better than I could, I then could move on and come back and enrich further. And then it would just keep going.
So I think that comes down to respect, having the respect for people's work, having the respect for people's hustle, and seeing that they can execute, and the trust that they can execute. Like when you're meeting individual people. And I think we've talked about this as well. When I met Christina and we were working together, not together in the same company, but we were crossovers. There was crossover in our work. That was one of the things that I had right away. I was like, okay, you get shit done. You execute like nobody's business. I have major respect for that. And then over time, the trust builds. And then even though we weren't close friends, we had met each other only a handful of times, but that basis was there. And when the idea for Bombshells came around and the values were aligned, and I knew, okay, we both are pushing in this general direction, I wonder if this is something you would be into, I knew you were the perfect fit for it. It was just internal. I just knew. And I think when you talk about executing, that's what I think back to in terms of what you're looking for, is that trust that they can execute.
Yeah.
What are you thinking, Ian? I see that you're about to say something on that.
The wheels are always turning. No, but I think I guess where I get a little bit my response is basically on this idea of, we have to find people who can execute. I think that's important. I do think that being able to actually do stuff is important. But I think we have to also recognize that we need to move away from the exceptional people idea, that everyone needs to be a superstar in order for them to have value. And that's, I think, contrary to the stone soup model. Because I mean, we can sort of take a version of that where somebody is contributing, the entire chicken stock base for the soup, and other people are throwing in a handful of salt and pepper. Everyone can bring what they have. Every contribution is valuable. Every contributor is important. Now, you still have to contribute.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear about people who are thinking about throwing in ingredients. Those people don't get to eat soup. I'm sorry. No, if you have, I know a lot of people like this. I know a lot of people who are in this entrepreneur startup mindset, and they're not starting anything. They're an entrepreneur nothing. They are just, it's all just talk. It's all ideas. But if you can do anything, any contribution has value. And I think that that's really important to cement, because not everyone has to be a superstar. Not
I
everyone
couldn't agree
has to
more.
be, you know, a
Yeah.
PhD holder who is also running, writing grants and blah blah blah. Like that's because
That's just
I
one.
think
That's Ian Cromwell. No one else can be you.
I am aware that I have some, I get to contribute. I have a lot of things that I can contribute, a lot of ingredients that I can bring to the table. I'm very aware of that. However, the people who matter the most to me are the people who say, look, I want to give something. I want to bring in something.
And
And that to me, I think, is the most important. When we talk about people who are executing and people who are collaborating, I think that's, you start with the people who are willing to contribute something, and then you build those people up. You empower them, you elevate them, you strengthen them, so that when you do have a bigger thing to build with, you've got someone who has a track record, someone, again, Raquel, as you mentioned, that trust piece is very important, but also that they are more able to bring more to the table the next time.
This is what I call, this is a very big part of the facilitative leadership model. And I think we're talking about leadership now. We're talking about, and I am a bit dubious about using the word just straight leadership, because I think facilitative leadership is not saying, I want you to do this. It's not authoritarian. It's not top down. And I couldn't agree more. And I think this is what Raquel and I talk about with our team often, is we need to figure out what someone can do. And I think what I meant by executing is, you're right. I don't need someone to be doing at this like conceptually high level that other people determine to be amazing and incredible. And we have a team that are people who are doing a few things very consistently. And we know that they are happening. We know that they're getting done, and that we know that we don't have to chase. And there are certain instances in life where you're like, I mean, for me, for example, I have very bad date dyslexia and numbers. I have a very difficult time reading numbers. So me being able to communicate that and say, hey, I'm really interested in doing this, but I'm just going to let you know right now, numbers, when I'm proofreading things, I will skim past them. I am constantly being corrected. I have tried so hard to find different ways to not be the person that gets the date and the time wrong. Every single week it happens, and that is okay, because other people know that that's something I'm not really, it's not really in my ability to control. But I think the second part is the accessibility. We want to create accessible work and community spaces, and that means understanding that what someone can contribute that they believe in is super valid and very, very important. And then it's our job to find ways to help collaborate so that they can elevate in what their way is best, not to learn how to become me or do what I do next. I want them to learn how to do something that I couldn't do.
And I think you've touched on something really important there, a piece that we haven't yet discussed, which is honesty and vulnerability. And I guess integrity as sort of the overarching for both of those, is that if we do think of, these, the Elon Musk model, the genius, he's a dick, but, he's rich, so we have to call him a genius. But this idea that there are these exceptional individuals, and that is what makes success, is that you have a genius who single-handedly pulls the world forward. And that's just wrong. That's not how anything works. But we have the ability as leaders to demystify some of that and to say, here's some stuff that I'm bad at. I need your help, because I can do this piece over here, but I am not going to be good at this piece over here. I don't have the time. I don't have the capacity. I don't have the skill. This is not what I'm great at. And if we're all spending our time on things that we're great at and excited about, we're going to do better collectively than if you just wait for one super genius to come along and do all the work.
Which comes down to brutal honesty with yourself. as leaders?
I guess
As
it doesn't
anybody,
have to
but
be brutal. It doesn't have to be brutal. I think you can have gentle honesty. I think you can have nourishing honesty. I think that you can have transparent honesty. And but oh no, I think sometimes we do get into this idea of brutal honesty, that honesty needs to hurt, and it doesn't. It doesn't. Honesty can be healing. Honesty can be inviting. Honesty can be welcoming, and I think it should be.
I want to okay, yes, but I think the word for brutal honesty, in my mind, it's semantics, which we both know that all three of us know how much I love playing on the words. But I think it's really actually about determining the difference between something that is uncomfortable. And if it's uncomfortable, I think traditionally people are like, oh, that was brutally honest. And it was like, okay, it was in my mind, it was uncomfortable for me to say it. It felt brutal to me because it is not. And so then I iterate and keep trying to learn how to say things with more kindness, with not such of a reactivity. But I think that there is a space for like quote unquote brutal honesty, but I think we have to go through the discomfort of challenging our systems internally that might not want to say something, that doesn't want to put their hand up and say, I don't know how to do this. And I think, Ian, the reason I say that is because you are very grounded in what you know you can do. And you and I think Raquel as well, I will give us like a proud pat on our backs for saying we've spent a lifetime having to defend our positions in society and having to do so without being angry, without being defensive. And that sometimes works and it sometimes doesn't, but it provides us an ability to be able to be very honest based on the resolution of us knowing that we are hardworking, reliable, and we believe in what we're doing. So that, though, if you don't have those pieces, and I'm just speaking to those people who are starting out, who in whatever their new career path might be, whatever you might be doing, you might be in a situation where it is going to feel uncomfortable and you're going to need to make a choice about how you're going to be honest, how you're going to be vulnerable. And it isn't always going to look dreamy and accessible to other people when you do it. But I would highly encourage you to keep doing it, because that kind of honesty is the honesty that we need in the world. To have us put our hands up and say, we don't know the answer is the truth. And I think that is something that, Ian, you do exceptionally well. And you will look at me and say, I don't know how to do that, and not have guilt surrounding it. Whereas for me, for a lot of the time in interactions you've seen me, where I will look at you and say, I don't know how to do that. And as if it's a real big problem. So wherever you're at in your journey of your career or your life, like take a minute, think about how you do say these things to people. If you say, I don't know how to do that, ask yourself the next question. Why? Oh, because I was raising a small child, because I was doing this other thing that I believe in. So don't beat yourself up if you don't know how to do something, and allow yourself to be honest about not knowing, because you're doing your best with what you've got.
And the other side of that is, as a leader, when someone comes to you, when they have the courage to come to you and say that they don't know how to do something, be mindful of how you receive that.
Mm-hmm.
Be mindful of what your response is. That
Yeah.
if people feel safe coming to you to say that they don't know something, you're going to do a whole lot better than if everyone is terrified that they might get discovered as an imposter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't just say Google it.
Oh, I have that story. I have that story of putting my hand up in a new position and asking, or before I joined a space, and having someone in a very senior position copy in others and tell me that if I didn't know this, that I should Google it.
And they copied people. Oh,
Other people heard too. Yeah, it was a really, I was furious. I was furious. I felt stupid. I had Googled it as well, because I was like, oh, I don't, I didn't know the questions that I should or shouldn't have asked. And it was not received well. And I think that what I like about where we sit today as peers, we're thankfully in a position where we get to have those lessons and not be those people.
I just want to I want to make sure, Christina, that I highlight this, and I hope that you believe it, that is a story about someone else's failure. That is not a story about your failure. That is a story of someone else's failure to lead.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And yeah, it took me I actually called Mike. I went into another friend of mine who was the CEO of a company that I used to work for. And I walked in and I was red-faced. And I called him and I was like, I'm coming in, I'm having a conversation. And he sat there and said, I am so sorry that someone who knows who you are cannot... And who I am is irrelevant, but it made it worse and even more degrading knowing that that person knew that I would not ask a question without at least trying to find an answer myself one time. It wasn't just wandering in and being like, you know.
So what do we do here?
We're making spaghetti? Can I have that basket? Is that a stone in your soup?
What's going on? Go.
This is my favorite thing about Ian, is we know how to just like bring back all the many points of the thing and then put them in the basket.
They call that a callback.
Which is going to be extra funny because all of that happened before the first clap.
No, it didn't. No, this was all after. Oh, we know. We got this. Don't worry, babes. Everyone knows. Everyone's just clapping in the background with us now. Now we begin.
Restart
with Ian Basket Hands Cromwell. Just jazz hands every time we see each other from now on. Well, Ian, thank you. We have so many more conversations that we can have to get deeper, but I love that. Thank you for really highlighting that transferability, for really making such a good case for abundance-based mindsets and collaborative thinking and stone soup recipes, and for all of us who are starting in every career. You always have something that you go, oh, what would it look like if I got to do that instead of maybe a career that you're a little bit tired in or something that you don't want to do. I hope this episode allows you to feel like you can explore and find the others, as you say so well, and not be stuck to an outcome, but really enjoy that process of you getting deeper into who you are as a human being and celebrating what humanity really means to you. So thank you for bringing that to us so articulately and basically talking me out of a job. This might be my last show with you all, my friends. Ian Cromwell may take it over.
And Christina's absence.
I was going to say, you all missed the part where I was fired, but...
This is now known as basket brunches.
Raquel is just falling over.
I just need that clip, the finger clip. That's what I want, just for my socials. I just want
the finger clip.
It's shared everywhere.
You guys can have that one yourselves.
All right, my dear Ian, I'll see you soon. Raquel.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you so much for inviting me.
You're amazing. Raquel, I'll see you later.
I'll see you sooner.
Bye,
Okay,
Ian.
start.
The end. Oh, and he left. He knows how to make an exit, that boy. Thanks for listening, bombshells. In order to continue to elevate, subscribe and don't forget to click that little bell so you can get notified every time we have a new badass brunch. Until next time, stay focused, fierce, and fabulous.